I want to go ahead and turn it over to Kai Durant, who will be providing our opening remarks as well as doing the moderating the Q&A discussion. And she is also one of our alums here. She just graduated May 2020 from the policy track. And so we just want to tell her congratulations.
Thank you, Tiffany. My name is Kai. Like she said, I'm one of the recent alums from CSSW in 2020. I'm excited to moderate the webinar. I'm excited to moderate the Q&A at the end. Thanks for joining us this afternoon for this webinar about civic engagement and what role social workers can play. I think as you guys do your studies, those who are like starting their journey or have been social workers for a while, you kind of notice that we have a deep knowledge of the policy concerns and issues with the communities that we work with and the people that we serve. And there's a lot of space and room for us to be more involved when it comes to civic engagement and play a bigger influence in it. But there might be oftentimes that we might not have a strong understanding of how to navigate these policy issues or how to engage in the policy process. But there's tons of rooms when it comes to the policy process to play influence on it, when it comes to voting, choosing a candidate, holding elected officials accountable, or even like direct work in shaping the budgets and legislations that impact us, or really key areas that social workers can have a larger role and a bigger influence on it. So from this on in webinar, it's like a first of many series of webinars or talks that we're going to have this year. We hope that you gain a better understanding of how you can approach the policy process, clarify approaches that social workers can have when it comes to influencing policy and people we serve, able to build the skills supporting the people we serve and exercising their right to vote, organize and practice to be an effective influence when it comes to elected officials and legislation, and then even identify ways that you guys can get more involved with civics engagement and find other people to tag along and bring with it. In this webinar, we're going to have 3 speakers who are very excited for them to talk about different processes of civic engagement. And at the end, we're going to have a Q&A where you guys can ask any questions that you have. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Lewis, who's going to talk about the legislative agenda, how we can really influence that.
Okay, thank you, Kai, and good afternoon to everyone. So I am a political social worker, and that's a new term for me because, like many social workers, I did not go into the profession to be a political social worker, and it sort of found me as I was deciding what would be the best way for me to utilize my knowledge, skills, and talents on behalf of people that I wanted to help. And so I'll tell you a little bit about me. I am an alum of the Columbia University School of Social Work. I graduated in 2002 with my PhD in policy planning and analysis because I wanted to be exceptional in terms of my ability to participate in the policy arena. So I encourage some of you guys that don't stop at the MSW. If you're really interested in policy, try to go to the next level if you or at least think about it, because the research skills and knowledge that you gain in a doctoral program are really necessary to engage in policy at a very high level. But you can engage in policy at any level. In fact, one of my messages for today is that all social workers, whether they are macro, micro, should be engaged in the political arena. So, like I said, I went into social work rather late in life. I had dropped out of school. I was living in Brooklyn. My dad had died when I was 16, and my mom had died before then. So I was kind of lost. So I was trying to find my way and do things, and drifted for a long time. I had jobs. Actually, I had a job working in a political office in Brooklyn, the borough president's office in Brooklyn. That's when I sort of got my first taste of being in a political space. But that didn't work out, and eventually I kept drifting and uh, went back to the church because my dad was a pastor, and church was always a place that I felt comfortable in, and like many black men in America, sometimes we don't find our way until we lose our way. And so I kind of lost at a point. So I go back to church, and at the church, it's a church in Brooklyn, the St. Paul Community Baptist Church, and it has a vibrant ministry to men. The pastor there, Johnny Ray Youngblood, was reaching out to African American males and telling them that they needed to come back to the church because that would be a place where they could find a hope, and they can get back on track. And so he put me in charge of this ministry. So I was telling these guys, you know, you got to go back to school, guys. You know, and it was the younger guys because I figured it was too late for me. By that time, I was like in my late 30s, early 40s, and I'm saying, well, I'm done, man. You know, if I was going to do school, I should have went back a long time ago. And then I said, so I was telling these guys, young guys, you know, go back to school. You need to go back to school. So some of them listened to me, and it was a vibrant ministry. In fact, I was just reminded that actually there was a book written about that ministry called "Upon This Rock: The Miracles of a Black Church," written by Sam Freeman, who I've come to know very well. And Sam Freeman is at Columbia. He's at the School of Journalism, and we are very, very good friends. But so at a point, I was thinking, you know, I'm telling these guys they need to go back to school. And I said, you know what? I got to listen to my own advice. And then I started thinking about going back to school. Long story short, went back at the age of 42 to complete my BA. And I got a BA in psychology. And so I had gone into therapy. So I said, yeah, I'll be a psychologist. That's what I'll do. And the dean at the school I was attending, the College of New Rochelle, he said, have you thought about social work? I'm saying, social work? I don't know, man. I don't think I want to be a social worker. So he said, no, think about it. Talk to some people that may be social workers and find out what they do. And so I had seen this movie, Claudine, back in the day where James Earl Jones and I forgot the actress name, but anyway, social workers would go to Diane Carroll was the actress, would go to her house and look under the beds and in the closets, seeing if they could find James Earl Jones. So I had this really negative view of social work, but I met a past president of the National Association of Black Social Workers, Morris Jeff, and he not only convinced me to go to do an MSW, but also to do it at his alma mater, which was Clark Atlanta University. So when I go to Clark Atlanta University, I got my MSW in clinical counseling. Along the way, I saw that I took a policy course, and I said, social workers do policy? And my professor said, of course they do policy. And so that's when I said, well, you know what? All of this work on the ground, all the micro work is extremely important. Direct services, help so many people get their lives together. But at the same time, if no one is paying attention to the policy, then it makes that work harder, because you need policies and resources to support the work that social workers do. So I decided that I would take that next leap. I was like, in my late 40s, and I'm saying, wow, man, a PhD at this age. I said, man, by the time I finish, I'll be 50 years old. And then I asked myself, well, you're going to be 50 if you live long enough. So do you want to be 50 with the PhD or without a PhD? So I decided to go in and do the PhD at Columbia. It was a wonderful decision, wonderful experience. Had some really great professors, Irv Garfinkel, Steve Schinke, uh, Sheila Kammerman, just to name a few. Got to study with Robert Shapiro at he was the chair of political science, and took some courses at Columbia School of Journalism. So I got a well-rounded education at Columbia, which prepared me for the next moves. So I'll try to make this short so I can get to talking about what we should be doing now. But I taught at Howard for a while, and then Mr. Ed Towns, or Congressman Ed Towns, offered me a job on the Hill. And I went on the Hill to work for Congressman Ed Towns in 2010 as his deputy chief of staff and his communications director. So while I'm on the Hill, my first time, being on the Hill, I am trying to decide, what can I do here that would have some impact. And I realized that there was no social work caucus. Nurses had a caucus, psychologists had a caucus, the Spotted Owl had a caucus, but we didn't have a caucus. So I asked Mr. Towns if we could create a congressional social work caucus, and so we have. And so, for those of you who may not know, there is a congressional social work caucus on the Hill, and we created that caucus so that social workers could have a platform where we can take our ideas, our concerns, our issues, and we can let our voice be heard in Congress. So, if, for example, next week, on the 23rd of September, Chris, my organization, will be doing a briefing on the Hill virtual briefing now, with the Congressional Social Work Caucus and Congresswoman Barbara Lee's office. She is the chair of the caucus, and we're going to be looking at, we're calling this bringing the power of social work to schools. And we're going to be addressing the issue of replacing cops in schools with mental health, social workers and other mental health and social service providers. Many of you may you're following the events of today. You know that there has been a call to take cops out of the schools, and some school districts, I believe Denver for one, and in Los Angeles, most recently decided to take $25 million from their budget for putting police in schools and using that money to increase the number of social workers, nurses, and psychologists. So there's a trend for this, and so we're going to talk about how far we may go with this, because obviously there are going to still be schools who want to have police in schools, and so it's always tricky with these things like defund the police, because while there is been some, obviously, we could name the names, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, we know what happens when police misuse their power, their authority and power, and it leads to some very bad outcomes. And so, I guess some people feel less police, less brutality. but we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about whether or not this should happen. There's a bill that was recently introduced by Congresswoman Ayanna Presley and Ilhan Omar, called the Counseling Not Criminalization Act in schools. And so that's something that this is led by social workers. We'll have social workers on the panel, and we'll be talking about social work issues. So that's one way we can be engaged. So after Mr. Towns retired, I created the Congressional Research Institute for Social Work and Policy. It just happens to round out to CRISP, so it's easy to remember. And so I have been working since to help social workers stay engaged with Congress. One of the things we do annually is a student advocacy day, where we invite students from schools across the country. We have students coming from as far as California. Of course, Columbia participated in this. Hunter also participated. NYU, Wisconsin, Madison. Schools, I think 2 years ago we had about 300 students from 24 schools in the country. Of course, this year we had to cancel it at the very last minute because of the coronavirus pandemic. So, but we plan to do something again next year in March 2021. And it's going to be, if we don't have an in-person event, we'll either have a hybrid event or we'll arrange scheduled meetings for social work students with Zoom meetings with congressional staffers. So the whole idea is to give young social workers, students, an opportunity to engage with the federal government, because this is your government, all right? The federal government works for you. And sometimes, we get twisted, and, Congress people think that we should supposed to, pay homage to them, and, but no, they actually work for us. Our taxes, our votes get them into office. And so they should be responsive to us. But many times they're not responsive to us because we think after we vote, that's it. Now voting is really important. It is the lifeblood of a democracy. Participating in voting, making your choice, electing people to represent you is really it's a right, but it's also a privilege, because many people have given their lives for us to have this opportunity to vote. Women didn't have an opportunity to vote to 1920, so it's a precious thing, and I think, and I really am proud of the students here at Columbia who are engaged in this in the voting campaign and all the work that you do. But that is not where so and obviously this year is really cool. We got to get out there and vote, because our democracy is hanging in the balance, and we need a change in the White House. And so obviously it's a critical thing to do. But a lot of times we vote, and if the person that we want to win wins, we say yay, and then we're happy, and we let them go and do their thing. And oh yeah, they're going to represent me. They're going to do what Or if the person that we didn't want to win votes, we just we hold our breath and wait for the next election to see if we can do better. But that's the wrong thing. We have a representative democracy, meaning that we elect people to represent us. And so the only way they can represent us is that if we stay engaged with our elected officials. And that's not only Congress, that's on the state level, that's on the local level. So you need to know who represents you. You know, in all of my classes, when I was teaching policy, I would ask on the first day, you know, who represents you? You know, who's your congressperson? Who's your state legislative? You might have more than one. You might have a senator and a state assembly person. Who represents you on the city council? You should need to know who these people are because they represent you, and you have every right as a constituent to um, make your desires known. So if there's something that you want done in terms of schools or transportation, you know, the buses are not, the routes are not um, working for maybe some of your clients to travel for transportation, whatever the issues are. You should be able to go to your representative's office, tell them who you are, and if you live in their district, they're going to pay attention because you're a vote. And not only you're a vote, if they don't treat you right and you go back and tell other people, you could be a lot of votes. So they're going to pay attention. So stay engaged. Know who your representatives are on every level, even the school board, the local representatives. But not only that, know something about them, okay? Because Congress and in state legislators and the councils, every representative sits on committees. And it's the committees that they sit on that determine what their focus is in that wherever they are. So if they're on housing committee, education committee, you know that the bulk of their work is going to be in that area. So that always helps you in terms of knowing who your representatives are and knowing what they're doing by knowing the committees that they sit on. And again, like I said, voting is the beginning. Okay, you need to vote. Voting should just be automatic. I mean, it should be a ritual like Halloween or whatever. We do it every year, and we participate and we engage, and we get others to participate, get others to engage. But that's just the beginning. After you vote, you got to stay engaged, because when we look around now, more people are aware that things are out of whack. There's of course racial inequality. There's economic inequality. I mean, there are our tax system has created billionaires, but at the expense of who? All right, so there's still too many poor people in this country, too many people who don't have health insurance, and so these things need to change, but they're not going to change until something is done. And what my latest cause is to change the system. I just discovered ranked choice voting, where I'm not going to have enough time to explain it all to you in detail, but instead of having two parties participate in a primary or in separate primaries, usually the Democrats have their primary, the Republicans have their primary, and whoever wins those two primaries, they come together and compete for the seat. This is more of an open primary where Democrats, or you can have a lot of people run in the same primary, and and the top vote getters, so you vote for the first person, the second person, the third person, and then at the end of the day, whoever those top people are, then they participate. So you could have independents, you could have Democrats, you could have Republicans. It's an interesting way to do democracy, and I think it's much more democratic than the system we have now. Um, if you're interested in knowing more about it, there's a book I would recommend called The Politics Industry. The Politics Industry. Catherine Gell and Michael Porter have come up with, they're promoting this idea of ranked choice voting. And like I said, it's also, I know it's being done in Maine now, and I know San Francisco is doing ranked choice voting. So when you learn more about it, you'll understand why we won't have the polarized system that we have now. And one of the good things that they say in the book is that you don't have to wait until all 50 states do ranked choice voting, that Congress will change significantly if we can just get 20 states to do ranked choice voting. So I don't know, my time must be running out, but one last thing before I close. 3 years ago, I read a book called Democracy in Chains, written by Nancy McLean, and she details very clearly how libertarians had exercised disproportionate influence on the electoral process and governing, and it was funded largely by the Koch brothers. You might have heard of them. And so the system was twisted. And of course, the book that we read for this particular session, One Person, No Vote, goes into great detail to talk about how gerrymandering and other activities has corrupted our system. And so I had I raised the question: can social work help save democracy? So for our Social Work Day on the Hill in 2018, I raised the question: can social work help save democracy? And out of that, we got an opportunity to take it to the National Associations of Deans and Directors. They really appreciated the need for social workers to really be concerned about not only our own issues, but also about the structure of our society and government. And so we're going to be launching the Social Work Democracy Project. So be on the lookout for that. You can learn more about it on our website. I'll have to. I'll apologize. I'm having some difficulty with. I'm migrating my website now from one host to another, and it's so. If you go to my website today, it may not be working, but it should be up and running pretty soon. So check it out and learn more about what we do. Email me with any questions, or if you want to get involved, because it's really important that social workers stay engaged in our democratic process. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Professor Estades.
Okay, thank you, Kay. Well, thank you, Charles. A lot of food for thought in your presentation, and I'm going to try to piggyback a little bit. First, I want to acknowledge the fact that last month, when we talk about political empowerment, we need to acknowledge the fact that last month was the centenary of the women acquiring the right to vote in the United States. That was 1920, August 1920. And it has been 100 years since then. So the irony is that after suppressing the women vote since 1878, when the Constitution was created, today, 2020, women are the most important blocking vote in the United States. And they are going to be deciding the next election. And to be very specific, it's going to be senior citizens, females, who are going to be carrying that, which is, especially here in New York, is the #1 vote. So that is extremely important to remember, because usually when we think about the vote, we don't think much, even when the statistics has been for a long time stating that women basically are the ones that basically are the most important sector. And of women voting, African-American women voting are also the #1 senior citizens. So we can continue, making it, going into the atom of elections. And that's the atom, that's where the explosion is women, senior citizens, mostly African-American. And Charles mentioned Democracy in Chains, which I read. Is a great book. Please try to buy it. You're going to learn, especially about, Charles said, in terms of the Koch brothers trying to control the vote in the United States. And that started in the 1990s, but even in the 1980s by other people, not so much the Koch brothers. But one of the things that they did in the 21st century is the fact that they created legislation and they created cases in court that basically went to the Supreme Court and created the basis of discrimination and voter suppression that we have been suffering since 2011. The first one was the case of Citizens United in 2011 that basically said that corporations are people. Therefore, corporations can put as much money in a campaign as they want to, billions of dollars. Since then, the cost of campaigns has increased exorbitantly, taking away that opportunity from people, because corporations, money is freedom of expression under the Constitution of the United States. Therefore, they have a bigger bullhorn than we normal people have. So there is an inequality and a privilege that is created under Citizens United. Then right after that came the Shelby decision that basically diminished the Voting Rights Act. And in this election in 2020, what we are going to see for the first time, not for the first time, but in a more clear way, that people are going to have more difficulty voting. But this is the #1 issue. We are expecting in November the largest turnout ever in history. The largest turnout in history due to the polarization of the parties and the situation in which we're living. COVID, I mean, the pandemic, the racial unrest in the United States, and also the fact that we have a presidential election, everything in 1 year. So the expectations of people coming out to vote are united, because the Shelby County decision that basically diminished the Voting Rights Act, that means that in the South, they can do what they used to do before 1965. Before the Voting Rights Act was approved, which is to discriminate any way they want to, because we don't have the Voting Rights Act to protect us. Therefore, we're going to have a high turnout, but at the same time that we're going to have a high turnout, we're going to have the biggest voter suppression campaigns in the United States since before 1964. So there is a lot at stake in this election. So I just wanted to piggyback on what Charles mentioned, especially in the book, Democracy in Chains, because they have been successful in order to make sure that the vote is not a right, but a privilege. And that's how it has always worked in the United States. Now, let me give you a little bit of history. I'm the president of the Latino Leadership Institute. I founded the Latino Leadership Institute after working in 1996 in a presidential campaign from a nonpartisan perspective. I did voter registration in the East Coast of the United States and get out the vote. And I organized the whole East Coast of the United States. We did this with I'm Puerto Rican. We did it with our Chicano brothers in the Southwest and the Midwest. We divided the country in three. We did voter registration and get out the vote, like I said. And we were very successful in doing that. But after that, I noticed that the Southwest Voter Registration Project, which was founded by Willie Villegas, who was one of the lieutenants of Cesar Chavez, and the anecdote that my friends tell me is that Willie Villegas used to get upset sometimes with Cesar Chavez because he said, look, we go to strike, they beat us up, we're trying to get rights for workers, and then we call the elected officials, and when we think that they have our back, they betray us. So we need to create a project in which we create our own elected officials. And they created Southwest Voter Registration Project, and they have been training people to run for office in the Southwest for more than 40 years. So I decided to copy that, and I say that humbly, because I basically learned that from them. And I created the Latino Leadership Institute in New York, and we have been operating since 1998, on and off. And then in 2011, I put all my time in the organization, and now we're going to our 10-year, basically training people in New York, Philadelphia, and Orlando, Florida, in terms of helping them to understand the electoral process and run for office. So we start our academy in October again. It's always one semester from October to December. The classes are 2 hours. And each class, if you go to any other program that does that, they charge you $3,000, $4,000 for a weekend, and they teach you one aspect like building a base in 45 minutes. And we provide 2 hours per class in each one of those aspects. And we do it for free. We have never charged anyone. So on the 26th, we're going to have a mini academy at Columbia University. I hope that you guys can register for that. It's going to be on a Saturday. We're going to do the whole academy in one day. We're going to have Letitia James. We're going to have Gail Brewer, because we're going to celebrate the centenary of the women's acquisition of the voting rights. We're going to have a panel of 7 elected officials and grassroots candidates who have lost, so we can exchange experiences. And it's going to be a colloquium. There will be no presentations. It's something that the Latino Leadership Institute has done a lot, creating colloquiums in which everybody jump in at any time, and there is a more interesting discussion than when people come and they just make a presentation-ish. So that's going to be at noon on the 26th, but we're going to start at 9 in the morning, and we're going to have our teachers training people. Having said that, we had to cancel the barber event that we had for tomorrow. It's going to be next week. It's going to be next Tuesday. So for those who register for that event, You are still registered for next week. We're going to let you know about the change. So what we find ourselves this year is that as the voter suppression is going to be increasing, people cannot go as they want to vote. We are trying to find other ways of voting. And for example, mailing is extremely important. And that is also being sabotaged. Something that is very important for us to understand in terms of voting is that there is no federal right to vote in the United States. The Constitution of the United States gave that right to the states. So the states can do whatever they want in terms of voting. And after the weakening of the Voting Rights Act, even the states now have even more power than they had after in 1964. So therefore, everything is going to become more difficult, not so much in New York, but there are certain states where there are going to be a lot of protests. Florida has an issue with the ex-felons, which was a Jim Crow law that in 2016, during the election, there was a referendum. Trump won Florida by 4%. The referendum won with 78% of the vote in Florida, which was huge, allowing ex-felons to vote, which it couldn't happen. Once you went to jail, you couldn't vote for the rest of your life. That was a Jim Crow law that existed until 2016. After 2016, then the Republicans in the state of Florida, and it's always Florida, in the state of Florida created a law that basically says that those ex-felons who acquire the right to vote after being in prison, they cannot vote unless they pay fines related to their imprisonment. Or if they have any fines, driving without license or whatever, they cannot vote. The ex-felons, not the rest of the population, the ex-felons specifically, until they pay those fines. The Supreme Court refused to hear that case this year. Last week, the 11th Circuit basically said that the new law is constitutional, therefore they have to pay a fine, meaning they're taking the power. Now, there is an amendment in the Constitution of the United States that basically talks about poll taxes. You cannot prevent someone from voting by asking them to pay to vote, which was one of the old Jim Crow laws. That usually was basically, that option was presented mostly to people of color. Well, it seems that the 11th Circuit decided that that amendment doesn't exist anymore because that is basically a poll tax. And that is part of that strategy that Charles was talking about before, that the Koch brothers and the elites and the corporations, that legislation and those Supreme Court cases that they created. In law, I'm a lawyer, I'm a social worker. In law, there is a concept called test cases, are cases that are created by groups and they pay for all the legal fees, etc. And they keep funding that case until it goes to the Supreme Court so they can win. And they pay all the lawyers and everything, millions and millions of dollars. That's part of the strategy that the Koch brothers had, and also the corporations. And basically, they have been very successful. Citizens United is part of that. Shelby County is part of that. So none of these decisions that suppress the vote are decisions that come out of nowhere, that are there by accident. It's totally the opposite. It's by design. Now, going back to the Latino Leadership Institute, what we do is that we teach people the art of, if you can call it an art, the art of running for office. So our classes are campaign finance. That's going to be the first class this year. And it's taught by the Campaign Finance Board of New York. So you're not going to have a better teacher than the Campaign Finance Board. Then after that, we have a class on petitions, how to acquire signatures in order to satisfy the request, which is 900 signatures, and do it legally, because even if you have 3,000 signatures, you know, your opponent can take you to court and say that those signatures were fraudulent. Therefore, you can lose enough signatures that you cannot run. So we teach you how to do it in a legal way and do it correctly so your opponent cannot take you out. We have a class on social media and how to use social media in order to acquire more votes and to improve your campaign. We have a class on building base, how you build your base in your community. In order to run for office, we have a fundraising class, and we have a field operation class, and also we have an ethics class because we decided that we are not going to help people to run for office unless they have a sense of ethics. Why do we want to create more elected officials that are more of the same? And I say that very respectfully. Not all of them are bad, but the fact that everything is improvised, you know, you can get an elected official that may not represent your interests. So the best that we can do is basically to teach a class on ethics. And based on that reality that we train people to run for office, we also were very concerned about the fact that people, they just want to run for office, but are they prepared to be in office? So we created a second semester in which we teach public policy. And the areas in which we teach are basically healthcare, environmental justice, housing policy, education policy, and community development, not economic development, community development. And we teach those classes during the winter at Hunter School of Social Work. The classes that we teach on elections, we use the Labor and Urban Studies program on 43rd Street that also belongs to CUNY. And now we're working very closely with Columbia in these conferences that we're putting together. Now, the Latino Leadership Institute is a volunteer organization practically. So everything that we do it for the love that we have for our communities and to be empowered. Many of our students are not Latinos, because this is something that everybody wants to get, and it's the only place where you can get it for free. So you come to one of our classrooms and you see whites, you see African Americans, you see Latinos, you see Asians, you see everybody. So we are very well known and we have done some impact. But the policy classes to me are the most important to us, because activists from all over the city come to our classes and they get data. Our teachers are most of them are PhDs, very different from our teachers at the electoral semester, in the electoral semester. Are usually PhDs who do research themselves. And when they come to our classes, they share the data, the information that they have, the statistics with activists in the communities that get that data that sometimes it hasn't been shared with government. They get that information and they use it in order to advocate for their communities when they go to a hearing at the city, state, or federal level. So sometimes our students, many of them who have no degrees but are activists, they go to hearings with data that even the government doesn't have at that moment, because they acquire it from our teachers who are researchers and are PhD professors in different universities in New York. So our goal is basically to create the best and most complete activists that can win office, but at the same time, all the tools that people learn in the Latino Leadership Institute in terms of creating a candidate and to run for office are tools that you can use in organizing day to day. You don't have to run for office. The tools, the strategies are not that different from those that are used for community organizing. So for social workers who are in policy, who are in community organizing, the Latino Leadership Institute is a perfect marriage because you can go there and get the information that you need in addition to the one that you got during what you were doing the master's degree. And we deal more with the practice of the organizing, not so much a theoretical practice. So that's basically what we do there. We also do conferences, and we have been successful in getting some people elected. For example, from Columbia University, Mathilde Frontus, who was a professor at Columbia. She was the one who brought me to Columbia too. Is an assemblywoman, and she took the classes at the Latino Leadership Institute. By the way, she's going to be the moderator at the conference that we're going to have on the 26th. She's going to be the moderator of the women's panel. And there is a big number of those who have been elected in different positions throughout the city. In Orlando, Florida, we had 7 students. After 3 years of being there only, 7 students got elected to office there. So that's what we do in terms of creating a candidate. And this is something that the School of Social Work, especially in terms of community organizing and policy, should be adding to the school.
Professor,
yes, I spoke too much.
Warning. So I just give you a 2-minute warning before we have to move to the next panelist.
Oh, well, you give me more than my family. So the warnings is over. No, I'm fine. I'd rather answer questions, Kay. Don't worry. I'm done.
Okay, thank you, Professor Estades.
Okay, Kay.
Thanks. We'll transition to our next panelist, Danielle.
Hi, awesome, thank you. Hey y'all, my name is Danielle and I am also one of the alumni co-chairs for Social Work Votes with Kai. And today I'm going to be talking a bit about voting and elections and how we can incorporate that into our social work practice and how we can really build sustainable programs at our agency. And I also want to note before I jump into this and start going through it, that these things and skills we're going to go over are definitely things that we can use with populations who don't have the right to vote and with people that we serve who don't have access to the ballot. We can still use it to build a program of influencing elected officials the way Dr. Lewis talked about on issues that Professor Estades brought up. So I just want to be clear that while we're talking about building these structures around voting, that we can still use them for other forms of civic engagement. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just to help us, help me be a little bit clear as we're going through this. So we're going to be talking, right, like I said, about influencing policy through building civic engagement and really thinking on how do we make civic engagement and voter registration a part of social work practice. And we can think back to a long history of this being a component of social services. We could think about like the motor voter law in 1993 that actually recommended that agencies of social service also be places where people can register to vote. There are also a number of different studies who have showed that increasing people's agency by giving folks a sense of control, by registering them and helping them to vote, increases their well-being overall, which definitely aligns in our mission as social workers. And importantly as well, this is one way we can help to influence policy by working to elect people who are compassionate and accountable, who respond to things that the people we serve bring up to them. And we can do that by working to create an influential voting bloc. And we can see how the idea of like an influential voting bloc is actually something that is effective. If you just think about like New York City and who has access to the mayor's office, like who has his ear to influence different policy. And you'll see a lot of times it's voting blocks that like regularly turn out and vote. And so hopefully what we can do with this presentation implementing in our practices is start to create those policies at the places where we are working. So to go over just like a quick overview of what like the rough bones of building an agency program look like, it is building a team and making a plan, which we'll dive into on the next slide. It's then working to win over stakeholders. So it's examining those in our agencies along their hierarchy and seeing whose support do we need to get approval on this project. So who do we really need to engage and bring into this conversation for this project to take off? And on sort of the flip side of that, it's also who, do we not need approval from for this project if that helps to streamline it. And then after we sort of have this plan and a team of people to support us and we have our stakeholders invested in it, we need to be able to put a good plan into action, which means learning all about voting regulations in our area. So it means like on the day of the polls, learning where voting locations are, seeing if they move, learning about people's eligibility to vote in our areas, and thinking about issues of uncertainty and how to address them before they come up. If somebody might have a family member who is unable to vote, but they can vote, helping to like work through that and address that with the person we're working with. And then also thinking about different issues of literacy and knowing the accessibility laws, both at the local and federal levels. So knowing that like there needs to be a interpreter provided by like a voting site, or that people can help like mark a ballot for someone. Knowing laws like that to help the people we're working with feel empowered as they're going to the polls, and also to see if we can help to do that as well. And then, of course, lastly, the fourth step is putting the plan into action and, bringing it to life with the support of people in our agency and with the support of the people we are serving. And so when we're thinking about an agency plan, there are like a few key components. And I think the first and most important one is definitely to make sure that we are realistic within our time and resources so that we can really be as effective as possible in making a plan. And so I think a good example of a way to like think through of building a realistic program is to look at what a program that works with folks who are experiencing houselessness could look like. So something like that could involve connecting with legal organizations in the local community who will work to protect the vote, who will understand voter registration guidelines, and could help the people that we're working with understand, can they register at a cross street of two streets where they spend the majority of their time, or do they need a shelter address? And for us, working with the program, it could be understanding like the deadlines for folks to register to vote, and the deadlines if people are able to like request a mail-in ballot and have it get sent to a shelter. What's the deadline for that? And to also think about, like in terms of the agency, what works within the agency and what resources do we have, and what can we use to like focus our effort, right? We want to make sure that we're not spreading ourselves too thin and really using like the resources available to make a program that addresses as well the needs of the people we are serving. And with that, we also want to make sure that it is an engaging program so that we are actually being effective and actually, working to build the civic engagement. And so I think a fun way to kind of think about this is if we're working in a school and we're working with people who might not be of age to vote, but who still definitely know people in their community who can vote and who are probably very interested in, especially like this election, with it just being like in a lot of our conversations happening around. There's still a great way to make a plan of maybe we do like a role played election in the school. We have a mock election and we have a night where, you know, the kids can vote in their mock election and they can bring their family members or community members or friends in to learn about the issues on the ballot, you know, and that could be a way to sort of help build this community structure around voting. And that quick example is also a good point of that this is more than just voter registration. It's also things like understanding mail-in ballots, absentee ballots, especially during the pandemic, how folks can get them, their options for turning them back in. And also, you know, different things like different ways to be engaging, whether it's like tabling to provide this information, whether it's holding events, whether it's somebody in a hospital wearing a badge with a QR code that folks can scan to see if they're registered to vote. And also making sure that specific barriers, this is point number 3, are addressed in the information we're giving out. So this could be a lot of times finding a way to provide information about the issues that are on the ballot and like an accessible and easy to understand way, and understand the issues down the ballot. So not just the presidential race, but all the way down to the different offices, initiatives, and issues that folks will be able to vote on. And also with specific barriers, it's thinking about things like day of voting if folks are voting in person, like getting people to the polls and providing transport that works with their schedules. So it could be things like walking with, you know, someone who's voting and their kids. And while they go and vote, you know, maybe you can stand on the curb with their kids, play a fun game, and help to both establish that relationship with the folks that we're serving and also civically engage them and empower them. And then also I want to emphasize that like we should always be doing voluntary programs, and also programs with this idea of voluntary that aren't creating shame or guilt for people who can't vote, who might hear our messaging, or for people who, you know, might choose not to vote for whatever reason, who are also hearing our messaging. But with that being said, that we can also create like some fun incentives to get out and vote, like maybe working with a local grocery store and, you know, getting folks a stamped card where if they vote, they get 5% off their groceries when they turn in the card, or things like that. So we can absolutely incentivize voting, find good ways to do that with the populations we're working with, but also to make sure that we are never shaming or guilting people who can't vote or choose not to vote. And in creating an incentive and this idea of like engaging people to vote, it can sort of help to start thinking through what our vote really impacts. I think a good way to conceptualize a lot of different issues is thinking about next year when in New York, a city council and a mayor are going to be elected, and thinking about the entire world of issues and policies that the council and mayor vote on for New York, and what it would look like if these elected officials really felt beholden to the people that we serve because we have mobilized and organized a like clear voting bloc. And so this is a lot of different issues of like city level services, like social services, clean water, housing, stopping new jails, police budgets. You can see a few examples up on the screen, and a lot of it comes from like, where is funding located? If we're thinking about like even the police outside of New York City, and a lot of towns, it means voting for like a sheriff, voting for a leader of the police, and thinking about, you know, how's the city council? Are we voting for council members who are going to increase or decrease funding or work to defund the police? And the same thing with jails, thinking about voting for people who are going to support or not support, hopefully, building new jails, and also thinking about elected officials like district attorneys who are going to set guidelines that trickle down at different levels of prosecution and what crimes are being prosecuted, and what the guidelines are for people that they, you know, find guilty for things like bail. Those are all things that come influenced from an elected official office like the DA's office. And you'll also see different issues like schools and healthcare and housing, and just how our taxes are, one, being set, and how that money is being used to expand, public goods, and as well as different ideas like sanctuary cities, clean injection sites, minimum wage, a lot of ideas that I feel like we talk a lot about in social workspaces that really get implemented with policy by elected officials. So by combining some of the things that Professor Estades and Professor Lewis have talked about influencing our elected officials, working to get elected officials in office who feel beholden to the people that we serve, because we are creating a voting bloc, can really go a long way, and then being able to successfully advocate for policies with them later on down the road. And so after we've run an awesome and super successful plan with our agency, it's really important to then step back and reflect after the election to recognize everybody who participated in it, either like as a team or the people we serve who voted, find a way to really celebrate and make an accomplishment out of what they've done. And then to dive into like what worked and what didn't work and what's going to be different next time, because this is not just a one-time plan. We really want to work to create sustainable plans and programs of voting and civic engagement in our agencies that happen year after year, not just when there's a presidential election. And so one example of like a fun thing to do to have this reflection and brainstorm session is to invite a winning candidate to come and, thank their constituency for voting and engage with the people that we serve, so that they start to build that relationship as well. And then that will help set up the foundation for a really awesome plan then going forward with the ideas that we've talked about, not just with the people who've made the plan, but also with the people that we serve who participated in it, of what worked well for them, what didn't work well, where can we be providing more support, and also like what was missing, whose voices weren't there, that needs to be included then moving forward. So that is a very quick overview of what building a plan can look like. And I am going to drop a link in the chat of a link to sign up to volunteer with Social Work Votes, which is a great way to get involved and start thinking about these different ideas of how to build a plan, but also to get some resources and tangible actions and ways to get involved with us.